It's episode 193, and it's just me today talking about my trip to New England and Salem.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the Seance.
Hey, my Paranerd peeps. This is your host, Patrick Keller, and today I wanted to do something way different, because I wanted to do a solo episode today, just to talk to you a little bit about my recent vacation. And some of you, I'm sure, followed along to many of the photos that I posted on my Facebook and many in the Parlor, because I had there were some cool things that we were doing on vacation, including visiting Salem, a very quick visit to Salem. It was just an afternoon, really. But also we were in Kennebunkport, Maine, and spent a little bit of time in Portland, Maine. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you want to, you can go into the Parlor on Facebook, Big Seance Parlor, and most of the photos I took are there. So, my husband's family goes on vacation every couple of years, and they always go to cool places. And so, fortunately, I get to go along and be a part of that. And one thing that's cool is that, like, for example, the last vacation we did was in Lake Tahoe. And what happens is that, like, every branch of the family, they rent their own house. So in Lake Tahoe, up on this mountain, for the most part, you know, the 3 or 4 different kids, older kids of the family, got their own house rented. And so there were some things that the whole larger family did together, and then everybody would break up for certain things. And each evening, or many of the evenings, a different house would host dinner and be responsible for dinner. So you would travel to each family would host, and it's a really large family. Well, this same family, we went to Kennebunkport, Maine, and same plan, had several homes around Kennebunkport. One of them was right basically across the shoreline from the George Bush Ranch, or whatever they call it, the property. And so out on the water, you could see security, and it was lovely. I mean, this was such a beautiful area driving along the coast. It was like being in a movie, but one of the family homes was right out there. And our home that I stayed with Joe and my sister-in-law and her husband and Joe's parents, was right in the square of Kennebunkport, and it was built in 1784, I believe. And this is really cool because where I'm from, and in the Midwest in Missouri, an old house for us is like 75, 80 years newer than that. Rarely I don't know how many homes you see that go back to the 1700s. And so it's crazy to me. You know, a really old building in my hometown would have been like the 1880s. And this is 100 years before that. And if you think about what was going on in our country, our very young country at that time, 1784, the Treaty of Paris, I think, happened that year. I looked that up. And, it's just my imagination was running wild. This house, first of all, had been added on to, I think in the 80s, the 1980s. And so the house has doubled in size, but the old original half of the house still very much looks like what it would have looked like then, with the addition, obviously, of some electricity, things like that. But I loved just sitting in there with a cup of coffee. And not a lot of people hung out on that part of the house. Everybody was in the larger, newer, the bigger kitchen and nicer part of the house. But just sit there with my coffee, look out the windows that faced the main street, and just imagine the carriages, imagine the horses, imagine the dress of the day. It would have been a family, I think a larger family that lived there originally. And the dining room, which I think would have just been the full-fledged kitchen at the time in 1780s, very much reminded me of the farmhouse from The Conjuring, Andrea Perron's home. And I even texted Andrea. I texted Andrea Perron some pictures of the dining room and some of the rooms. And I said, am I wrong about this? This is totally giving me vibes of your farmhouse growing up. And she was like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. So that's the vibe I was getting. Our bedroom was actually in the newer half of the house. It was built very tastefully in the same style, and it matched very well. But I did wanted to make sure I spent quite a bit of time alone, quietly, in the original part of the house, whether it was reading a book or just relaxing and sitting there. And I'm up late at night a lot, and I didn't have any experiences. And I know that you're not surprised by that, I'm sure. I had, very quietly asked for anybody to make a noise or let me know that they're there, and, didn't really have much of anything. But again, not a surprise. So anyway, that was the house that we stayed at. Kennebunkport, Maine is beautiful. I had never been to Maine. I haven't had, outside of New York City and Washington, D.C., for example, I haven't had a lot of East Coast, New England visits. And so this was very cool. And of course, you fly into Boston to get to Kennebunkport. So you get to see a lot of that New England area. And it's beautiful. The weather, oh my gosh, it was like fall. And of course, this is toward the end of July, our vacation. And the weather was like fall in Missouri. It was beautiful the entire time. And of course, we returned back to St. Louis, and it was in the 90s and miserable. So that was not fun. There were a couple of trips that we made to Portland, Maine, which, if I remember correctly, it's like 45 minutes to an hour away. I could be exaggerating that. And Portland's also very cool, very hip. Well, my husband took me to the Victoria Mansion, which is also known as the Morse-Libby House. And as soon as I saw photos of this place before we went, I know that I have seen this mansion on a ghost show. Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, something. And in my research, I cannot figure it out. I can't find any episodes, any videos, but I know that I've been down a rabbit hole of looking up pictures and reading about this house years ago. But that's where we went. It was actually my husband's idea. He's really good at planning things. The Victoria Mansion was beautiful. You should look this up. The main entryway and the hall and the stairway, it is just like a movie. And I don't think there's any other house like it. It is very much in original condition for the most part, I believe. And they've done a really good job of preserving it. It looks massive. It's not as massive. The tour went really quickly. We took a tour. I felt particularly cool about the upstairs. What did they call it? It was the gentleman's room or the smoking room, where men would have run off to after dinner and the ladies would have stayed downstairs. And it was really a small room. I mean, it would be the size of a modern walk-in closet or even smaller than a walk-in closet. But the decor, the dark colors, the curtains, the chandelier, it was so very cool. I could have just hung out in that room for hours. It could be the set of a movie. And of course, it was built in between 1858 and 1860. So, that's the old style that we tend to find more around here in Missouri, in the Midwest. Now, we were in Kennebunkport for about a week. But on the last day, before we went back to the airport to catch a flight back to St. Louis, I hadn't even thought this whole time. And of course, I am geographically challenged. And my husband plans vacations. He just plans everything. And I just get to enjoy it and follow along. So I don't remember if he mentioned or I mentioned or somebody on social media mentioned that Salem was nearby. And I was like, shut up. Do we have the ability to go to Salem? Is it close? Is it on the way to the airport? How far is it? And it is very much on the way from Kennebunkport back to Boston to the airport. And so we planned a trip on the way back for the afternoon. We had lunch and then spent a couple of hours in Salem. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. Now, it's a bucket list item for me to go to Salem. And I must tell you that I imagined something very different. I don't know how to describe it. I imagined Salem to be, I guess I was imagining still seeing like an old colony. And hopefully that doesn't sound too ignorant when I say that. Let me find my pictures here. But yeah, I imagined at least partially there to be a little spot where you could very much imagine the Salem of the past. I did not expect to see just kind of a big suburban city with all the modern things that you would see in homes and like almost nothing original. And people from Salem might laugh at me because I don't know what I expected, but there is not much, really, truthfully, there is not much that is from the time period of the Salem Witch Trials. Of course, the first thing that we did, I wanted to make sure very first, I said, let's make sure we park near the Witch Museum and the burial ground and the memorial. So we first went to the old burial ground, and it very much is taken care of and what you would expect and beautiful. And you can see a lot of the old headstones, tons of them. They're almost on top of each other. A lot of them aren't legible. And there's just, constant groups of people walking into the cemetery, taking a self-guided tour around the cemetery. And there are volunteers all around helping guide people through. And it was a beautiful day, and so we took a little tour around the cemetery. And I did expect to maybe see, because I know there are a few major people buried in the burial grounds, but I didn't really notice anything marked. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there's a reason why they don't have certain notorious historic figures marked in the cemetery. But probably what you're imagining is what it looks like if you haven't seen photos. And then right next door is the monument to the witch trials. And I think this is a monument that was built recently, and I'm really glad that they were able to build it right next to the burial grounds. And so I have several pictures. I didn't take pictures of each person's little monument, but it's really sweet because you see, depending on who it is, you can tell some of the gifts that are with some of the people are very personal to people and probably have a lot to do with that individual who is memorialized there. But lots of flowers and decaying flowers, little stones and crystals on some of them. And so it was just kind of cool to see. And again, there were lots of people touring. It's a busy place, but people were being appropriate. It's a somber place. From there, I guess I forgot to mention the very first stop we made in Salem was for lunch. It was lunchtime. And so we went to a restaurant in the Hawthorne Hotel, which is historic in itself. But it's funny because it's a couple of years, 100 years newer. It was built in 1925, which incidentally, I think is the same year that my old middle school was built and is no longer standing. It was ancient, and it's provided lots of nightmares for me, but it was a cool building. I've always been fascinated with it and think about it all the time. But anyway, 1925 is when this large hotel was built, and I think it's probably the tallest structure there in the old part of Salem. And we had lunch in the Tavern inside the Hawthorne Hotel, a nice place to go get lunch. And I thought I remembered reading on the way there that the original site of many of the murders, let's just call it what it is, of the accused witches were around that property, possibly even where the hotel was built. But I since can't find anything saying that, so that is probably very wrong, but that's what I remember. But after lunch and after the memorial and the burial grounds, we went to our appointment to see the Salem Witch Museum. And I didn't find out until later, once I'd already returned home, that a listener of the podcast, Caitlin, works at the Salem Witch Museum, and we had just missed her. So that would have been cool. And I'm sorry, Caitlin, that we missed you. So if you go to their website for the Salem Witch Museum, which is salemwitchmuseum.com, I'll read some of the description, basically, of the museum, which tells the story very nicely of the witch trials. And there are 2 exhibits. And the first one, I think, is the oldest part of the exhibit that has a lot of the history. It says, in January of 1692, 9-year-old Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, the daughter and niece of Salem village minister Reverend Samuel Paris, suddenly felt ill, making strange foreign sounds, huddling under furniture and clutching their heads. The girls' symptoms were alarming and astounding to their parents and neighbors. When neither prayer nor medicine succeeded in alleviating the girls' agony, the worried parents turned to the only other explanation. The children were suffering from the effects of witchcraft. As word of the illness spread throughout Salem Village and eventually Essex County, others began to fall ill with the same alarming symptoms. The afflicted complained disembodied spirits were stabbing them, choking them, and jabbing them with pins. Soon, names were cried out as the afflicted began to identify these specters. Neighbors, acquaintances, and total strangers were named in the statements and examinations that followed. Gossip and stories from decades prior were dredged up as fear continued to spread. Over the course of the year 1692, approximately 150 people across Essex County were jailed for witchcraft. Ultimately, 19 people were hanged, and one man was pressed to death after being examined by the court of Oyer and Terminer. This was the largest witch hunt to ever take place in America and would be the last large-scale panic to take place in the New World. To understand the events of the Salem Witch Trials, it is necessary to examine the times in which accusations of witchcraft occurred. There were the ordinary stresses of 17th century life in Massachusetts Bay Colony, a strong belief in the devil, a recent smallpox epidemic, and the threat of attack by warring tribes created a fertile ground for fear and suspicion. This was made worse by a growing factional conflict in Salem Village, the village's rivalry with nearby Salem Town, and the removal of the Massachusetts Bay Charter in 1684, which left the colony in a state of fear, confusion. To many, it seemed the Puritan ideal of a city on a hill was slipping away. Decades of work suddenly pulled from their grasp. Many wondered if Satan's forces had infiltrated their new land. In June of 1692, the Special Court of Oyer to hear and Terminer to determine sat in Salem to review these witchcraft cases. Presided over by Chief Justice William Stoughton, the court was made up of magistrates and jurors. The first to be tried was Bridget Bishop of Salem. Goodwife Bishop was found guilty and hanged on June 10th. 13 women and 5 men from all stations of life followed her to the gallows on 3 successive hanging days before the court was disbanded by Governor William Phips in October of that year. Trials resumed in January of 1693, this time with a new court, the Supreme Court of Judicature, the same court we use in this country today. This court differed from the first in that it no longer accepted spectral evidence. This evidence, never before allowed in New England courts, was based upon the notion that the accused were able to use their invisible shapes or specters to torture their victims. With this standard of evidence gone, the new court released those awaiting trial and pardoned those awaiting execution. In effect, the Salem Witch Trials were over. As years passed, apologies were offered and restitution was made to the victims' families. One judge, Samuel Sewell, and 12 jurors came forward to apologize for their roles in the Salem Witch Trials. The other magistrates never admitted there had been a miscarriage of justice, going to their graves believing they did what was best for the colony. Historians and sociologists have examined this most complex episode in our history so that we may understand the issues of that time and apply our understanding to our own society. It is significant to the parallels between the Salem Witch Trials and more modern examples of witch hunting, like the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s. The mission of the Salem Witch Museum is to be the voice to the innocent victims of the Salem Witch Trials, while also bringing awareness to the root cause of witch hunts from 1692 to the present day. By understanding this history through audiovisual displays, guided tours, educational events, and discussion, we strive to connect this tragedy to the modern world and highlight why history matters. And then there's a second exhibit, which is interesting too, but it's a smaller exhibit. And again, the website says, our second exhibit, Witches, Evolving Perceptions, is a guided tour which examines the European witchcraft trials, how the word witch has evolved and changed over time, and the phenomenon of witch hunting. This staff-guided tour provides an overview of the European witchcraft trials of the early modern era. Witch hunts began in Europe in the 15th century and continued well into the 18th century. During this time, shifts in religious thought, evolving superstitions, and general legal and social changes combined with a period of particular fear and tension due to massive outbreaks of disease, major religious wars, economic shifts, and irregular weather patterns. This dangerous mixture led to centuries of witch hunts across Europe and its colonies, and the deaths of at least 45,000, though the exact number remains unknown. This constantly evolving and growing tour focuses on why witch trials began, where they were the most intense, how the stereotypical image of a witch emerged in popular memory, and what the word witch means in the modern day. In 2019, we had the great joy of announcing the acquisition of a first edition of L. Frank Baum's classic novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Considered to be America's first fairy tale, this novel is responsible for several changes to the image of the witch in the 20th century. This very special book is currently on display in this exhibit. The tour concludes with the discussion of a formula for a witch hunt and how this formula may be applied to 3 20th century examples. When studying the history of witchcraft, it is important to understand that witchcraft was a crime created and imposed on innocent people. No individual actually had the power to cause hailstorms, spread mass disease, or fly through the night to a gathering of evil beings. This was a crime imposed on innocent people during times of mass fear and hysteria. While the legal prosecution of witchcraft came to an end in the 18th century, the pattern of behavior that caused witch hunts can be identified throughout history and in the modern day. Visitors are encouraged to submit their own example they believe fits the formula, and many do this online at salemwitchmuseum.com/witch-hunt. That's all from salemwitchmuseum.com. The Salem Witch Museum is a total must if you are going to make a Salem trip. And after that, Karen A. Dahlman wanted to make sure that I made a stop at the Salem Witchboard Museum. And we did go in, and it's a cute little store and museum. They didn't have any times available where we could go on the actual tour inside, so we didn't get to go on a tour. I'm sorry, Karen. But we did walk in and take a picture of the cute storefront of the Witch Museum. We also walked into Pentagram, the witchcraft and magic shop, and that was cool. And in one of the little shops, I got what is now my favorite coffee cup. And it is, I think probably many of the shops in Salem sell it, but it is the Salem coffee cup. I think it's probably something that the Chamber of Commerce or Tourism Board or something puts out. You could probably get it in several places, but it is beautiful. It is blue and it's textured and it's kind of sparkly and not really sparkly. I don't know how you describe it, but I have been rewashing this cup every day and sometimes twice a day for weeks now. I've been ignoring my other cups and drinking coffee out of this cup every day. It's beautiful. I just love it. I just had a sip of my coffee right now. We saw several of the statues that are around, some really huge statues of historic figures. There's the Bewitched statue that we actually missed. I don't know where that was, but it wasn't like the highest thing on my list, so I didn't freak out about not seeing it. But we apparently just didn't walk around whatever area that statue is at. I also went into the Halloween Museum and took the tour, self-guided tour which is quite interesting. And in that Halloween museum, they had an original film reel of the Hocus Pocus movie. That was cool. Speaking of Hocus Pocus, let's be real, y'all. This is one of the main reasons I was excited to go to Salem. You know, most of Hocus Pocus was filmed on a soundstage. However, there are a few locations that were used. And right inside Salem is the town hall, the old town hall, which I think was 1800s, like late 1800s maybe. And it was used for like the dance, the party, the Halloween party that the parents went to in Hocus Pocus. And of course, Max and Dani run in to try to warn them that the witches are coming. And then, you know, they get a spell put on them and they dance and party all night long. So this was the town hall. The inside of the town hall, I think, except for like the stairs right inside the town hall, the inside was not used, but the exterior you'll definitely recognize. And so we saw that building. We saw a tour that was stopped in front and talking about the Hocus Pocus filming location. And the other location, the main location that I was most excited about is, of course, Max and Dani's house. And it is outside a little bit of Salem. And so we waited on that for the last. And I noticed this house immediately. It is beautiful. It is right on the coast. You don't really see the beautiful body of water next to it in the movie, but it is there. It is right on the edge of the water. It is on the hill, just like you would expect. And it's just this old, it's not a fancy neighborhood, but it is definitely the coolest house at the end of this residential street. And that, I think, made my whole Salem trip right there, was to see Max and Dani's house. And it is a beautiful house. Of course, the exterior was the only thing used, but it's very recognizable. I took a selfie and several pictures, and also a quick video of the water and the boats out on the water. I mean, a lovely view. I don't know how much money or how valuable this home is, but wow. Somebody should definitely buy it and make it a some kind of Hocus Pocus museum or something. It's really small though, but totally cute. And I am sure that the people who live there expect the drama. However, I'm sure it gets old, because you can see online, I'm not the only one. There are plenty of people who have walked down that street to take a selfie. So make sure you're respectful if you go and visit the location. You know, it is a private home, but I don't think there's anything wrong with walking down the street and snapping a picture, which is what I did. So I definitely recommend that if you're ever near Salem, go stop by Salem. Probably just maybe just do a little more research than I did, because you're not going to see the old colony of Salem. And of course there is somewhere, and we didn't see it, there is a little old Salem kind of setup. They also used it for the film, that is there just to show you what it looked like. But I don't know where that was, but we did not see that. But yeah, there were a lot of weirdos around, and I lovingly call them weirdos, as I'm a weirdo too. And a lot of people walking around, and a lot of shopping, and, you know, just craziness going on. But, you know, everybody's drawn to Salem. It's a cool place, and I can't imagine it in the fall around Halloween. It would be crazy. So that's another reason why I'm really fortunate to have had this random opportunity to go see it now, when it was nice weather at the end of summer, and you kind of miss the craziness of October and Halloween. So it seems like a cool place to live and work, Caitlin. I'd love to know if you have any stories Either just stories of cool, weird things that happen in Salem, or any paranormal stories, or just anything fun about Salem. I hope you enjoyed my kind of blabbing as I told you about my trip. I normally script things, and so you don't usually just hear me speaking on my own, staring here at my computer looking at pictures. I'm also looking out my parlor windows today. Normally I shut the windows, not the windows, but the curtains, to hopefully help with the acoustics. I don't know that it ever really helps, but I just decided today, I want to keep the windows open. It's a beautiful day, looking outside as I record, talking to myself and you. Yesterday, my husband and I went to Bath & Body Works. I was excited to go check out the fall and Halloween scents and go sniff everything in the store. And so I'm smelling the Wallflower plug-in fragrance of, I think it's fresh autumn leaves or something. It smells fabulous. I plugged it in yesterday. So it smells of fall as I'm sitting here recording this. And one last thing, speaking of Hocus Pocus, I've teased it before, never in the actual podcast. I've teased it in the parlor. I teased it on YouTube. But I have interviewed, actually a couple of months ago, David Kirschner, the creator, writer, producer of Hocus Pocus. One of the coolest interviews ever. And if you haven't seen the video teaser, you have to look on YouTube, and I'll also put it in the show notes. But David, who is the nicest guy ever, big, huge Halloween nerd, he gave me a video tour of his studio in his beautiful home, where he had lots of Hocus Pocus memorabilia and just other cool things that he's done. He's also responsible for Chucky and An American Tale and a few other big productions and movies. So you'll have to look for that teaser. But I am going to put probably in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to go ahead and release that episode. I've been holding off a little bit to get into fall. I want it to be kind of the fall season when I put that episode out. But I also, and I can't say much because it hasn't happened yet, but I also hope to get at least one more Hocus Pocus related interview done around that time so I can also release it. So cross your fingers for me. Send me some good vibes. I have a commitment, but it hasn't been recorded yet. Thank you to the following super Paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Daryl, James Deacon, Genesis, Natalie, Kim Robb, Josiel Lorenzo, Susan Davey, and Amy Park Gedicke. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/Parlor guests, are Linda of ShimmeringMoons.com, Anne Rekovich of OzParatech.com, Denise Sia of Raven Haunts Paranormal, Sarita Cockram, Christine Rath Selhi, Mitchell Coombs, Christine Ferrens, Mindy Kentop, Hope Battaglia, Cassie Keller, Melissa Armour, Diane Rax, Nettie, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Lena and John of Carbon Lilies, Jim Budd, David Rubenstein, and Norman and Linda Keller. That sound you just heard was the above and beyond. There's not even a category for your level of support fireworks display. Because I have 6 awesome listeners who support the show at the $10 level. Peggy Hagan, Glenna Becker, Steve Skinner, Kevin Gilbert, AJ Meredith, and James Wilfong. So thank you, Peggy, Glenna, Steve, Kevin, AJ, and James. And thank you, Paranerds. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. And you can continue the discussion and hang out with a great community of Paranerds by joining us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Want to hear your voice in a future episode? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time. Additional music in this episode is by Alexander Nakarada at serpentsoundstudios.com and Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Full attribution in the show notes for this episode at bigseance.com/193.